Chapter 11. The Prime Minister's Office. They were all staring at Emma. The truth had come out, and while she felt a massive weight fall off her shoulders, the repercussions of what she had said fell back onto them like the opening of Pandora's box. No one seemed to know what to say. Xander kept silent, swallowing hard while glaring directly at Emma. Suddenly Liz's essay seemed far less important. She had stolen the moment, and just when Xander had professed little reason to distrust the authority, Emma had returned reason to question them. She covered her mouth regretfully. She fell into Johnny, who held her, but she knew it was only because he was expected to. If it were up to him, he probably would have let her fall to the floor. Their eyes burrowed inside her, asking the question she was now asking herself. Why did you say that? Who knows? All eyes turned to Xander in the corner. His eyes barely visible below the shadow of his cap. The only emotion left on his red face was rage. Jordan spoke up nervously. Sir, I swear I... Shut up, Jordan! Xander scowled. It's pretty obvious you didn't have a clue. Who knows? Emma looked up grayly, but Margot jumped in. Just me, she sounded. Everyone in the family and me. Jordan's expression switched on a dime as he shot daggers into Margot. And my counselor, Emma squeaked. Our counselor. Jackie White. And a few in the embassy, she almost revealed. But knew once Xander found out that truth, he might run to one of those people who didn't. The room dropped 10 degrees colder. Wait, what's the problem? Kent spoke up. I thought skips were normal. Kent, for the love of God, shut your mouth for once in your life and stop asking questions, Xander roused. This isn't about her being a skip. He ran to his locker and grabbed his binder full of information, then marched to Emma, shoving it in her face. Tell me why this says you're not. She caught her breath, backing into Johnny, who kept her from falling. She stuttered. My dad forged the records. Why? I don't know why, she shouted back, almost to tears. I don't know. She fell into Johnny and started crying. My uncle was, she admitted. I don't know how my dad knew that I would be too. Xander kept his eyes locked on Emma's. Explain the throwing then. I've been training my entire life, she cried. As long as I can remember, my dad has had me working on it in secret. Anytime I'm alone, I practice throwing things. She dropped her head shamefully. That's what happened during the stress test. Xander finally broke his gaze and moved quickly to his locker. He gave away his intentions, picking up his phone and mumbling to himself, I don't even know where to start with this. He looked back up, furiously darting between Emma and Margot. I'm sorry, he said, but this has to come out. No, please! Emma tore herself away from Johnny and rushed over to Xander. You can't... Talk to Shane, Johnny interrupted before she could get any further. Emma's heart dropped. The same debilitating panic she had felt weeks before on the training floor was returning. Daniels? Xander clarified, turning his attention to Johnny. Why? Johnny looked maliciously at Emma, then back at Xander. That's what he talked about after her breakdown, he announced. He said that if any of us saw something again, he needed to be the first to know. Xander pondered Johnny's words carefully. Well, Shane's his number 2, he argued. Not by choice, Johnny claimed. Garen only put him on the ticket so Shane wouldn't run against him. Shane wants anything he can get to force Garen out of the way. Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. The tears had stopped, her fear replaced by complete bewilderment at her boyfriend selling out her father, betraying her to her own face. Her voice was a whisper. Johnny, what? He told me to spy on her. An audible sigh by everyone else in the room masked the breaking of her heart. Margot turned on her heels and stared open-mouthed at Johnny. Oh, you asshole! But before she could reach him, Kent swung first, running at Johnny and landing a punch below the corner of his eye. Johnny stayed on his feet, turning a fist of his own and knocking Kent clear onto the floor. His nose shattered. Whoa! Xander intercepted, holding Johnny back from going at Kent again. Jordan beside him. Margot had dropped back to defend Kent. Liz was still off to the side, watching everything happen with her essay still in her hand. Johnny! Jordan, with me now! Xander growled. The rest of you patch up Kent and go back to the common room. We'll deal with this when I get back there. Xander, please! Emma tried. Emma! Zip it! He scolded. This is a bigger issue than you know. Johnny did not even look at her before walking out the door. Emma stood in shock as the first door shut behind them. Liz had finally snapped back to sense, dropping down beside Margot to help out Kent, who was dripping onto the carpet and still looked dazed. Em, help us carry him, she heard in Margot's voice. We need to get him to the medical room. I think he's concussed. But Emma's mind was racing. She knew the boys were heading directly for the embassy, and if they spoke to the wrong person, her father's job... No. His life could be on the line for abusing his power like this. And it's all my fault, she thought. Emma! She bolted through the door as soon as she could feel her legs, Margot's voice trailing behind her. She could see the backs of Jordan's legs heading up the main stairs, so she sprinted around the outside hallway to the back loading bay. Without a coat, flying into the darkening night as snow drifted slowly down through the freezing sky, there was only one thing on her mind. I have to beat them to the embassy. It took 2 hours for her father to come back. He'd been in his office when she arrived, but as soon as she started explaining what had happened, he told her to stay put, while he moved swiftly out the door and left her behind. She could hear the door locking her in as it closed. Once per hour, his receptionist would enter, offer her a glass of tea, and then leave, the door again locking when Emma sat alone. She could only imagine what her father was doing in his absence. By the end of the first hour, she started chewing her nails, a habit she thought she kicked years before, but the anxiety of the situation forced her to fidget with something. When the second hour approached completion, she could no longer sit still. Her father's office was at the very top of the tower. Behind his desk, a curved window made up the entire wall from floor to ceiling. Looking south toward the student lawn where she imagined Liz and Margot confusingly discussing what was going on outside the common room. Kent was no doubt locked in his room licking his wounds, probably congratulating himself for standing up to her. She thought of Johnny. How much she hated him, but how much she longed to be comforted by him too. How could she ever get over this? She had put off her feelings for so long exactly for this reason. Opening herself up to another person risked never getting part of her back if something happened between them. She would have to hide or endure that emptiness alongside a whole other person. But this was worse than a breakup. It would have been easier if Johnny were dead. The sudden urge to throw herself through the window tickled her mind, but she knew with an office this important, they were probably sealed tight and bulletproof. The thoughts disappeared with the sudden rumbling of the heating vents in the wall. Her attention turned to the pictures on the wall to the right. A single wedding picture of her parents decades before stood beneath dual degrees from Rice in Kansas State. At the bottom, an array of scattered photographs littered chest height like leaves fallen from a tree. Everything from formal engagements with foreign leaders to selfies she had taken during a trip to Wrigley Field. There's a single family portrait with all 3 kids, the only place Riley appeared on the wall. Her mind had just turned to her brother when the rumbling of the vents stopped as abruptly as they had started. The door unlocked, and her father marched back in, sighing heavily as he returned to his desk. "Well, that was an experience," he breathed. He leaned down to open one of the drawers, pulling out a lavishly decorated bottle nearly empty of whiskey, and poured himself a glass. "Sit," he commanded. Emma did as she was told. The chair was far colder than it had felt when she stood. He hinted toward the bottle. "Want one?" Her mind went immediately to her stash under the kitchen sink, wondering how many other things she had failed to keep hidden. Are you serious?" "Of course not," he pacified. "But I figured after the mess you made, you might need one." "Daddy, I'm sorry." "Save it," he said. "You've always been a garbage liar, especially compared to your brother." As harsh as his words were, his face was devoid of anger. He looked at peace, which unsettled her even more. He grinned. "It was a long shot anyway, really," he continued. "Trusting you to hide something like that. I just figured since you were my daughter, you might be able to try a bit harder at winning." Emma felt a tightness in her throat and tried hard to swallow it. "What do you mean?" His expression finally sterned. "I mean try to fight through the battle instead of giving it up for other people to solve." The Prime Minister narrowed his eyes. "Were you even provoked?" Emma sighed. "No." "Then why the hell would you admit to that? Unless you were backed into a corner." She was sure there was an obvious answer hidden inside her. Shame? Guilt? Paranoia? Whatever it was, she failed to answer his question. "Your boyfriend saved your ass, by the way." Her head perked to attention. "What do you mean?" Her dad grinned, taking a sip from his glass. "I mean, he's the reason this whole thing was taken care of so easily." He noted her bewildered expression and continued. "He told us everything that happened, suggesting Shane as the first point of contact saved someone else getting in the way of things." Emma swallowed hard again, trying to piece together what her father was saying. "But he said he was spying on me for Shane," she argued. "He said Shane was after your seat." Her father set down the glass and leaned over the desk. "He lied." Emma's heart began pounding hard again, though this time she could not understand why. "I've got to hand it to him," her father continued. "He's a lot quicker on his feet than you give him credit for. He was being honest about spying for Shane, but he's keeping an eye on Xander, not you." The pounding was getting faster. "Then Shane's on your side." "Of course he's on my side," he laughed. "You're right about him wanting my seat, but he knows to wait his turn. He's only 29 after all. Running to replace me next cycle would even be too early for him. He'd be a lame duck before he's middle-aged." Her father looked around the room like he was taking it in for a final time. "I've only got 2 years left before they force me to retire. I have no idea what I'm going to do after. I can't imagine being forced out in my mid-30s. And I know he doesn't either, so he's playing his part in the second seat." He took a deep breath and another swig. "So, we can trust him?" "Yes," he answered bluntly. "Shane knows everything that's going to happen before it does. It would be hard to surprise him with anything, let alone try to undermine him as part of a greater plan. That's why it's such a good thing he owes me." Emma swallowed nervously. "Well, what happens when he doesn't owe you anymore?" The Prime Minister smiled maliciously, more to himself than her, and his voice trailed off as if forgetting she was even in the room. "Oh, his secrets aren't conditional," he said, then turned back to face her. "But that's politics." Emma tried to read him. "So, who can we trust?" He grinned widely. "The better question is, who can't we trust?" He held out his hand to count on his fingers. "Mike Richmond, obviously, but that's why we're letting him take over after my term is up. He's been working closely with Shane over Poland, so I think we've convinced him to let Shane continue as deputy after he's elected. Shane can keep our business out of Richmond's plans for 4 years, 8 if all goes well. and then succeed him properly after the term's over. He stuck out another finger. His higher-ups in foreign affairs are no-go too, but let them be distracted with their business. Once this Polish nonsense is taken care of, they'll stay distracted with the new branch plant in Egypt. Point is, stay away from foreign affairs as much as you can. Stick with law, constitution, and local interests if possible. Rule of thumb is anyone can be trusted if you present it in the right way. That's how we got Symbolic on our side. Emma knew her father was a schemer, but she was shocked to hear him outline it in front of her. Does Mama know you're doing this? She asked cautiously. Your mother trusts me with controlling the narrative, he admitted. She hates it, certainly, but she understands why it's necessary for the two of you's futures. Emma stiffened. So that's why you sent him away, isn't it? She growled. Because your plans only involve me and Andrew. Her father slammed his palm down on the desk. Don't you bring up Riley in front of me, he hissed. You be grateful he's safe in whatever godforsaken country he's chosen to visit this week. I kept him alive. Me sending him away kept him alive. You'd be wise to realize that. Yeah, I figured you... Enough! He roared. What happened between your brother and I stays between your brother and I. And if it's anything to keep you quiet about it, he left on his own. I didn't even have to influence his decision. There was a rageful sadness in his eyes, but Emma was more drawn to his last sentence. What do you mean influence his decision? She asked. A snort of laughter shot from the Prime Minister's nose. You don't really think we could talk our way out of it with Xander, do you? Her eyes widened. Her father continued. Just because we control the narrative doesn't mean we own the system. Rewriting records? Falsifying information on a government-level scale? Those are high corruption-level charges, Em. They wouldn't just banish me if it came out. They'd probably execute me. You and your mother and your brothers, and possibly even Margot, too, could be considered accomplices. That's a potential banishment for every single one of you. Enjoy your new life somewhere nice, he teased. Complete memory wipe, falsified backstory, implanted memories. Em was shaking her chair. Oh, God. She started to cry. Daddy, please don't tell me you're going to kill him. Kill him? He smiled, throwing his head back and laughing. The first real smile she'd seen all day. Emma, relax, he joked. We're not the CIA. We don't just kill people who get in the way. She caught her breath, nearly hyperventilating by the time he assuaged her worries. But then there's a third option, he claimed. If you know how to use it responsibly. Emma's mind raced to find it before her father continued, tracing the beats of the conversation. She started. You're going to wipe his memory? Not wipe it, he admitted. He's the best leader we can give your squad, but modify it, certainly. All of them will. Emma sighed desperately, trying to calm herself back down, still terrified of her father and the way he was admitting this all to her. Xander, his wife, Jordan, Liz, Kent, he went on. Even Margot, to an extent. We'll tamper with their memories of you and your effect. They'll remember you never having one. Their memories and the records that support them will show that you've always been a skip, and nothing is ever stated otherwise. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek. But what about digital records? Well, we've already combed their phones, he stated. There's nothing there. But, she choked. That goes against the privacy... I don't give a damn about the Citizens' Privacy Charter if it means keeping my daughter safe, he spat. Emma took another deep breath. What about me and Johnny? Well, Johnny can't be touched, her father pushed. That's the one variable we don't have in our back pocket. He remembers everything. If you tampered with his memory, he'd know something was up and might start raising alarm bells. The good news is he's completely loyal to Shane, and I'm almost certain he's completely loyal to you too, even if he has to play it off the way he did with Xander today. All things considered, he might be the best spy we have at our disposal. Emma winced. Something about the person she shared her room with being lauded as a spy sat uncomfortably with her, even if he was her boyfriend. What if he's ever compromised? She bounced. What if something happens where we don't know if we can trust him anymore? Her father's face hardened. Then we'll do our best to make sure that never happens. As for you, you need to remember this. Let this be a reminder how serious the repercussions are for not listening to me. Dad, she interrupted. I don't even understand what this is all for. He took one final sip of his whiskey. And as long as you don't, he started, it's impossible to tell you with words. He narrowed his eyes and leaned in over the table. Legacy. Emma felt herself readjust in the chair. What do you mean, legacy? I mean, he articulated, I will not have my children simply be an afterthought in this place. Rules? Limitations? Those are all for lesser people. People without the drive and the skills to shape them the way they see fit. I will not have my children limited by the bounds built by others. Your brother understands that. I need to see that you can be trusted to understand that too. So after the horrific job you've done with it today, maybe you can mark that as a step in the right direction. He folded his hands atop the desk. Prove to me that you deserve it. Emma clenched her jaw, reinvigorated. Yes, Daddy. Her father leaned back in his chair. I do have some bad news, though, he said. Emma did her best to keep her face emotionless. On the topic of Richmond and the foreign folks, he continued, I do need you to take some of the pressure away from this trail. They're currently up my ass about Andrew surviving the assassination in Poland. She caught herself. They're upset about him surviving? But he got shot. Yes, and he's also the only one that got out alive, the Prime Minister went on. Regardless of how messed up your brother is right now, I'm the one who called the hit on Chervinsky. And my son is the only one who came back after failing to do his job. But that wasn't on him. It doesn't matter whose fault it was, he deflected. The Prime Minister sent his son to get the glory in a highly volatile mission. The Prime Minister's son didn't get the job done, and the Prime Minister's son is the only one who came back alive. He stared over the desk into her eyes. You're smart enough to realize how bad that looks politically. Okay, she agreed. But what does that have to do with me? Her father stiffened, then leaned in toward her. With a deep breath, he said, I need to send you on a follow-up mission. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Emma knew her reaction would be meticulously analyzed by her father, so she did everything she could to keep the terror flooding through her without showing on her face. Finally, she replied in a stiff voice. When? Her father relaxed. Early after New Year's, he claimed. We're still figuring out the details, but Xander should be prepping you by the end of the week. Emma's heart was racing like before. Her emotion broke through in a small squeak. Daddy, she managed. Please don't. You'll be fine, he pacified, for the first time dropping the guise of the Prime Minister and reaching across the table to hold her hand. She felt the nerves slipping out of her through her fingers as he continued to speak calmly. Don't think about Andrew, he ordered. Yours will be completely different. We'll keep you out of any real danger. Anything will be made to look real. But every position and movement you have will be choreographed to a T. It'll be entirely for show. We'll make sure you and Liz are nowhere near any danger. He looked into her meaningfully. And Johnny, and Margot, and Jordan, he continued. You'll all come back safe and sound, I promise. He released her hand and held up a single pinky. Emma replied with her own. Promise? He took hers and his and squeezed it the way he always did. Promise. Her father released her hand and straightened back in his chair. Now, he instructed, forget about today. Go and focus on your schoolwork for the rest of the week. If you need to, go decompress with Johnny. I'm sure he'd talk to you about anything he's told me. He stood up, ready to dismiss her. She did the same. All you have to do is play your part, he concluded, circling around the desk to pull her into a goodbye hug. Play your part, and trust me. It was a straight shot on the monorail from the embassy to the residential center. Emma was worried about what to say to her squad mates if any were waiting for her in the common room. It was almost certain they had already been washed. Her father would not have wanted a danger like that lingering longer than it needed to. But what could she say that wouldn't trigger something? She had no clue how the stuff even worked. Did they drink it? Were they forced to eat it? Was it some kind of gaseous drug that could still be in the air of the common room when she entered, making her susceptible to a secondhand whiff of the stuff? The more she thought about what would happen to them, the less she wanted to find out. And the more she wished her dad would have wiped her memory too. This was such an enormous violation of everything she'd been taught to trust in with the program. Every part of her wanted to scream the truth to anyone who could hear it. Luckily, the common room was empty. She was starving, and upon seeing the barren kitchen, began considering what to make herself before going to Johnny. Then she smelled garlic and realized his bedroom door was open. Johnny was sitting cross-legged on his bed, a large unopened paper bag sitting in front of him. Hey, he said, noticing her in the doorway. I got Olive Garden. She stood there, mouth agape. I figured you hadn't eaten yet, and I knew you had a really crappy day, so... Well, Game 6 isn't until tomorrow, but the Cowboys are beating the Redskins at halftime if you... She tackled him before he could finish his sentence, half crying, half laughing as she kissed him harder than she'd ever kissed anyone before. All right, he choked, managing to pull away for a brief second. At least let me put the food down first. No, she stopped herself. Don't. I'm starving. She sat up next to him, struggling to put to words what she was thinking. I wanted to kill you today. Well, I know, he replied, taking her simple statement far better than she had expected. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she critiqued. You saved my dad's life today. He grinned, his green eyes narrowing in on hers. I was just trying to protect you. I know, she said, kissing him again. You probably saved mine too. He opened the bag and handed her a breadstick. So you still remember everything? Well, Daddy didn't give me the option, she explained. Well, me neither, Johnny claimed. But he explained why he couldn't. He likes you, you know, she chided, her mouth full. Not nearly as much as my mom does, but still, more than most people get. Yeah, well, he's the boss, he stated. Like Xander said, it's my job to support him. Even if it's illegal? Johnny took a bite of his own. I know he and Shane know what's best, he argued. I'll follow them where I'm needed. Just like a soldier, she thought to herself. Just like Jordan's mom would have raised him. I'm sorry you're a skip, he said solemnly. If it makes you feel any better, I figured it out a while ago. I just didn't know how to talk to you about it. It doesn't, actually, she mused. It just proves how bad I am at keeping secrets, just like my dad said. Johnny opened his mouth to say something, but stopped himself. He took another bite of his breadstick. What do we do with the squad? He asked. Emma had been wondering the same thing. I don't know, she admitted. I don't really know how it works, so maybe we just avoid bringing up my throwing for a while. Maybe it'll just normalize for them if they observe it themselves. We could throw the attention back on Liz, he noted. She'd completely forgotten about Liz's essay. Oh, God. She put her hands to her face. I took that away from her. Johnny put an arm around her. You didn't take anything away from anyone, he supported. I did, though, she choked, trying not to cry again. That was her moment, and I went and screwed it up by opening my mouth. He sighed reflectively. Well, he started, if they don't remember what it is you said, then why don't we put the focus back on Liz? Let her continue to have that moment, then they'll all be focused on comforting her. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. I guess you're right, she agreed, turning back to the food and grabbing her entree from the inside. She took a bite of linguine before continuing her thoughts. Jeez, could you imagine? She said aloud. Getting your brother's body back in pieces? The realization of what she had said hit her as soon as her mouth closed. Johnny sat still, his fork frozen in his mouth, obviously thinking now about the same thing she was. The car bomb that had killed his mother and 6 others, including Jordan's father. The event that had made them brothers. There had not even been bodies to bury. Johnny, she clutched. I'm sorry, I didn't... It's fine, he breathed, clearly startled by the reminder. No, it's not, she huffed. That's something I shouldn't bring up lightly. Well, you didn't bring it up, he argued. So don't worry about it. Emma dropped her head down to her pasta, trying to think of what to say. Her eyes wandered over to the picture hanging on the wall above his bedside lamp. It was the only picture in the room. Have I ever told you why I keep that one there? Johnny voiced, as if he were reading her thoughts. No? Mom died before the seizure, he said. All of my memories with her are blurry. He turned back to Emma. In all honesty, I can't remember what she looked like. Emma hesitated, struggling to find something reassuring to say. But you have that one, she stated. Can't you memorize her face through that? Oh, I can memorize it, he claimed. But that's just one memory. I can't paste her face onto every memory I have with her, even the ones with my dad, and trust me, I've tried. Emma turned to hug him. I'm sorry, Johnny, she comforted, trying to imagine how difficult it would be, able to remember everything except your own mother. He offered back a consolatory grin. As much as you might hate your parents sometimes, be thankful you still have them, he sighed. I've lost 4 now. The week flew by quicker than expected. All appeared back to normal, even Kent's broken nose, which everyone seemed to attribute to a training incident the previous week, though there was a vagueness to everybody's memory in trying to remember the details. It was creepy seeing everyone else acting normally. With only she and Johnny remembering the truth, Emma felt like she was walking around in a video game. Everyone around her programmed characters guiding her through a day-to-day life, including Xander, the only person who was supposed to be giving her instructions. She found some solace in remembering her fear that he might be executed for knowing the truth, and realized quickly how great this third option was in handling that secret. Everyone was still alive, and everyone remained blissfully unaware of how close things had come to disaster for either Emma or her family. Reality returned in the form of Liz's essay. As far as Emma and Johnny could piece together, this was all the others remembered of Monday afternoon, and thus it was the thing that they were all still, or at least trying to avoid, talking about. Emma was taken aback Wednesday evening when she offered another church invitation to Kent. Expecting his usual insult, she was not quite prepared for the line, "Last week you asked how I couldn't believe in a God. Take a look at Liz and try to ask me that again." Everything considered, Emma thought that was fair, though she knew there existed a theological reply she was not quite wise enough to articulate. By the time they reached the training center on Friday afternoon, the details of their mission had been finalized by the embassy. Emma had discussed everything she knew with Johnny, but had no information beyond what her father had said Monday night in his office. Xander stood at the end of the dressing room. So, he began. As I mentioned before, the embassy is very high on you 6 as a squad. Even with a skip? Emma wondered silently to herself. Why are we going? Liz voiced calmly. Emma wondered if she too had been given warning by someone at the embassy, with the same promise her father had given her. Xander sighed, partially ignoring the question. I brought up a few weeks ago the possibility of our number returning to the mission docket, and despite our previous mission being pulled, this squad's overwhelming success in the stress test last month has made you all a prime target to rejoin the schedule. Emma turned wide-eyed to Johnny, who shot her the same disconcerted look. Xander continued. You'll all be aware of what's going on over in Poland. The eyes in the room traveled to Emma, no doubt all thinking about Andrew. With the assassination attempt coupled with the threat of nuclear attack, our foreign department is scrambling to figure out ends by which we can put a lid on Milo Chervinsky's government, especially with the threat that he's now carrying over the head of the IRA in Poland. So, they're sending us to finish the job this time? Kent pitched. No, Xander frowned. The mission they've offered us has no contact with Chervinsky or anyone in his immediate circle. Then what does it have to do with Poland? Margot voiced. Xander held his hand up to halt the questions. The aim of our mission is complete autonomy, he went on. Now that the Polish government is armed with a nuclear arsenal, any ties to nations outside NATO or the European Union are viewed by the West as dangerous. We have reason to believe several high-priority governments are making efforts to coerce the Polish into anti-Western alliances. Johnny spoke up this time. Red Scare 2.0? Exactly, Xander confirmed. They want us to infiltrate one of those alliances and keep information about the IREA from leaking out to an even more dangerous enemy. So they're sending us to Warsaw? Emma asked. Not exactly, Xander warded. Everything in Poland is off limits to the company right now. Even missions coming in and out of the city are on a long-term hold. It might be a while before any part of the organization heads back there. Then where are we going? Jordan interrupted. Xander looked at him, then tossed him the ream of paper he'd been holding under one arm. Jordan read the front cover with his one good eye, then looked up puzzledly. What does any of this have to do with China?